Hello, my name is Juan Carrillo, and I did my project over, I think it was basically employees. So basically, I created a database that had employee ID numbers and their related information, so their position, which site location they might be working at, and well, I can just show it right here. So basically, this was the table I used for the project as well. So basically, I went with employee ID and last name, first name, position, and site number were basically the variables that I had to work with here. I'm actually gonna go ahead and start by going over the code, and I'm gonna go over it in the order that I actually worked on it. So the first one that I worked on was the main menu right here, and I basically just, well, I guess I can show the form itself at the same time. So this is what I started with. Basically put the four buttons out along with the title, and went from there. After I did that, I added the forms one at a time and named them so that I could link them to the menu form. So once that was done is I actually first linked it to the search form, and basically just added it and told it to show the search form and at the same time hide the menu form. And I did that for all four of them. So basically showing the employee form and at the same time hide the main menu form, show the edit form, hide the main menu, and the last button is just simply a close um, command, so close the entire application. The next one was the search form that I worked on. I thought that might be the easiest one since it's only doing one thing. Basically, you're just looking up the information rather than the others where, like the edit form, where you have to look up the information and edit it, and the add form, which I was unfamiliar with at the same time, so I decided to leave that one for the end. But I definitely thought the search form was the easiest, and it definitely was. I was right in thinking that. So I basically did the same thing. I added all the labels, so basically the four labels along with the one text box and three labels. These are labels, these aren't text boxes, but they're just extended and given a white background to look like text boxes so that when the text gets inserted, that's what it looks like. I added a search button, clear button, and the main menu buttons. I know in the menu there wasn't a clear button, but in the instructions it specified that there needed to be a clear button, so I went ahead and added that. Um, as far as the search code, this was the first form that actually needed to have the imports Oracle Data Access Client, which basically allows this code right here to function. So without the imports Oracle Data Access Client, you wouldn't be able to run this code. Um, it wouldn't know what to do with it basically. So you have to add the imports Oracle Data Access Client. Uh, and with this code right here, it's basically referring to where the database is and at the csnet south texascollege.edu, along with the port number and the service name, all of which can be um, was all information that needed to be added when we first accessed the database at the beginning of the class. The ID and password that we were given as well need to be accessed there. This is just this right here. This right here is just the string, and the new connection is added down here with the string inserted into the parentheses so that it knows that that's the connection it's going to be making. The next is the main menu button, which basically does the same thing as the other buttons. It basically sends you to the main menu button at the same time as closing the current one that you're on. The search button, which I think is the only other button in this form. Oh no, there's also a clear button. So the search button, which basically does what this form is specific for, it opens up the connection to the database, or it basically starts opening up a connection, yeah. And this string right here, this is the command that we would normally type into the Oracle database to search for this information. So basically we put the select statement with EMP last, EMP first, EMP position, the three information, basically the columns of information that we'd be searching for, and then we'd give it a specific ID number to look for that specific. So say, like, I know I know what my ID number is, but say this is ID number 1. So basically it would get the EMP last, first, and position from that specific column. And right here, the text employee ID.text is where the employee ID is going to be inserted, which corresponds with this actual text box. This is the only text box on this form, and this is where the user would actually insert their ID number that they'd be searching for. Once that number is put into the text box, it gets referenced right here into this command, and this is the command that gets sent out to the database. Once that command is sent out to the database, it basically reads the data right here. While it's reading this data, it actually gets corresponded to each label, to a specific label on the form. So each one of these forms right here has a name. So this one's LBL last name, LBL first name, and LBL position. They directly correspond to the as it's getting the data. So get string 0 is basically the starting position, so which would be EMP last, which is why it corresponds with label last name dot text. So it would basically write it into that label. The next one is 1, so it would be the next position. So EMP first, which directly corresponds with label first name. And then the next one being EMP position, which is label position dot text. So even though those are labels and not text boxes, the text in that label is actually written as a text and not simply like as a picture or anything like that. It is actually written as text. Down here, the connection is closed, and at the same time, the focus goes to the employee ID text box. This clear button right here merely just blanks out all the information. So once the information is picked up using the search button, you'll see the information, you'll see the ID number, last name, first name, and the position that they have. You can clear the data and research for another employee ID at the same time without having to basically close the without having to close the application and have to refire it up just to look for another employee ID number. The edit one, I think, is probably the one that gave me the most trouble, just because it had basically two functions. It basically had you have to search for the employee ID all over again, which I already knew, which was the easy part, but then you had to edit it, which was new, and which is the part I spent a little bit of time on. So basically this first section right here, the button search, well, I guess I'll start right at the beginning. So basically you need to add the same command that you added to the search bar in order for it to give it access to the command so that it can reach, so you can launch this code so you can get to the database itself and basically know that what these commands are actually for and what they do. So this code right here is basically going to be on all the forms that need to access the database, and that's really not an exception. This string right here is a variable that's going to store the ID number of the person who you're going to edit. So this will actually, like, we'll see why we need this in a little while. The main menu basically does the same thing as the other ones. It sends you to the main menu at the same time and closing the current form that you're on. The first button, which is basically just a redo of the search one from our search form, is going to basically do the same thing. It's going to, almost the same thing. The only difference is that in this, when you click the search form in this, when you click the search button in this form, it'll actually pop up a prompt window, which will tell you, please enter employee ID, search employee ID to edit. So basically it'll create a pop-up window with a text box where you'll be able to enter the ID number of the person who you want to edit. Once you do that, it'll open a connection to the database, and it'll basically send this command to the database, this select command, retrieving all the information. So it'll basically select the EMP ID, the last, first, position, and the site number this time. It'll basically select the entire table. And then from the table, so p_employees is the name of the table, and then where the EMP ID is the string edit ID. This string edit ID right here will be the same number that you input at the top right here. Once it sends this command to the database, it'll start reading that data, where it'll basically correspond that data, just like on the search field, to the corresponding text boxes and the combo boxes. So the very first one, 0, which is the EMP ID. So the first text box will fill the EMP ID. The next text box will fill the last name, the first name, the combo box position, and the combo box site. But so remember, these are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 0 because that's the first value, so it'll start at 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So basically, if we didn't have site number, this would end at 3, and so it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3 instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This makes it so that the text boxes that were originally uninteractable and makes them interactable so that you can edit the information in there before sending out the request to edit that information. So it'll make it interactable and then close the connection while you edit that information. While you're editing the information, you're actually not connected to the database. You're only connected to the form. Once you're ready to interact with the database, you'll hit the edit button, which will basically use these variables right here to store the new data. So basically a new string EMP ID, which obviously will store the ID, the EMP ID that you were previously given, the last, the first, the position, and the site number, which is a decimal. Since it's not a string, it's actually the decimal number. And the reason, if I can see right here, yeah, the reason that it's a decimal is because the data itself will have to be inserted as a decimal, since that's what it retrieved it as. It got it as a decimal, and you turned it into a string to put it on the form. So now you have to send it back as a decimal, so the information will be the same. So basically, once these variables are created, the ones that will store the data on the form, you have to actually put that data into those variables. So basically, these right here, this is the form data. The ones on the right are the form data, and the ones on the left are the variables we created that are empty. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this empty variable and put in the form data that we have that we edited. So say we change the EMP ID, the new EMP ID will go into this variable, string EMP ID, and it will do the same for all the other variables, so the last, first, position, and decimal site as well. Once once empty variables have that information, we can send the string, basically the database statement that we normally would. So basically we send the update. So we're going to update the values of a current ID on the table. And then you'll put the table name, so p_employees, and then you're going to put set to set that actual variable. So basically we're going to set the EMP ID, and this right here is basically a placeholder for the actual data that's going to be in there. So this colon EMP ID is merely a placeholder which we will later change with the actual data. So this comment is, but this is still the comment that is going to be sent to the database. Once that comment is set, you'll open the connection with the database, and it'll and this is where you correspond this placeholder with the actual data. So EMP ID is the placeholder, which is this one right here, EMP ID, and you correspond it with the actual data that's going in there, which will be the string EMP ID that we corresponded it to up here. And right here, we have text last name dot text. since the text that is being brought out is already a string, we can leave it as text last name dot text instead of having to use the string last name. And the reason I actually have that there is when I was actually troubleshooting the code, I was kind of just messing around with things, and I had it as string last and down here. But when I was messing with things and trying to troubleshoot the issues I was having, I ended up switching it. And once I got it to work, I basically just left it as is and had it working. So um, I didn't actually switch it back. But there's no reason that having string last or string first should make this not work, since they're both the same data. Then you go on to position, so string position corresponds to string position over here, which equals CBO position dot text, just like the 2 and 3 did. And then decimal site, it's the same thing. And this one right here, this one is what's going, so the edit ID is the last one right here, where it's referencing the ID of the data that's going to be manipulated. So the ID, say it's 1 or whatever, and that's where all these variables are going to be updated. So the string edit ID, which was the one that you entered in the box, where's the box? It's got to be in the search field. See, right here, string edit ID. When you inputted the ID number was stored into string edit ID, which was referenced here to get the data the first time around. So since that ID number is still stored in that string, you can use that string again in this command to actually reference to the edit ID. And once that's done, this command makes it so that it knows that it's not a query and you're actually updating the data and not retrieving it. Once it does that, it empties the fields at the same time. So it basically empties all the text fields and makes them blank, and makes it so that the text empid.text is the string edit ID again, and CBO, all the combo boxes go back to their original uses, and at the same time, all the text boxes and combo boxes will be uninteractable at the same time. This right here is the catch exception, so that if anything up here fails, you'll end up getting this error message. So an error occurred while attempting to add a new record. And then it'll say error or whatever. And at the same time, it'll close the connection and terminate the database connection. And the last form, which was add employee, which actually wasn't as difficult as I thought. I left this one to the end because I thought it was going to be a little bit more difficult, but the edit one was definitely the one that gave me the most trouble. So same thing with this one. We add the same previous code for the same exact reasons. We're going to be dealing with the database, so we want to make sure that it has access to our database and it has access to the commands and knows what to do with them. The main menu button, doing the same thing. It'll send you back to the main menu and at the same time close the add employee form. The add button itself, let me show you the add form. So the add button itself is you'll be entering data into these text boxes and making a selection in these forms right here in the position and the site number. Once these boxes have all been filled, you'll click the add employee number and it'll add that to the database as a new record. So here we're doing the same thing. We're creating these variables right here that are currently have no data. They're basically empty, which is what these quotation marks are. They're basically nothing. And this decimal 0, so they basically have no data. So what we need to do is we need to add this data, or we need to add data into these variables, which is what we do here. So these variables get the data that was inputted into each one of these text boxes at the beginning. So each one of these text boxes has a name. So like this one has text employee ID, text last name, text first name, text position, and text site number. and that's exactly what they correspond. So the text employee ID text box corresponds with the variable that has employee ID, last name, first name, position, and decimal site, basically um, all corresponding with each other. Once we do that, we have to open up a connection with the database. So we open up the connection with the database and create that new connection. Once that's done, we do the same thing again. We insert the command that we would normally insert in the database. So insert into, and then the table, p_employees, and then the values. And again, these are placeholders right here for the data that's actually going to go there. And this right here is where we correspond that data, those placeholders with the actual data. So empid is going to use the string empid, which is text employee ID dot text, and then down the line, which is the data that's in here. So basically, it's just a huge chain of data. So basically, you'll enter the data right here. That data will go into string empid. String empid will go into empid, and then empid will go into the actual database command that will be sent to the database to input this record. Once that's done, again, you have to execute non-query so it knows not to retrieve the data. It's actually sending data. And then this command just basically resets all the fields back to blank. This is the exception handler that will, that will give you an error just in case anything goes wrong. And that's basically it for the code. So the next thing is to show the actual application. So we'll go ahead and start the application. So this is the application right here. We'll go to each form. So search form, go back to the menu form, employee form, go back to the menu form, edit form, go back to the menu form. So basically everything can go back and forth. So we can go to every single form and come back from every single one. And so we'll go to the search field, and basically these are labels, so we can't click these. We'll enter an employee ID, we'll enter the first one, and then we'll search. And basically we get Angelo Badalaman, and his position is a secretary. So we can clear the data and insert another record and get Landrum Kinney, which is from accounting. So we'll clear that data and we'll go back to the main menu and we'll do an edit. So basically what we do is we'll search for an employee. You'll get this pop-up box right here. You search for the record. So we'll go to that Angelo Baldeman, who was a secretary, and we'll change his name to Angelo. So first, let me show you the database. The database shows Angelo Badalman, secretary, EMP site number 1. So we changed his name to Angela, and so we'll save the edit. So since we got no error message, the edit should go through, and we can just refresh the database here, and we see that we actually get Angela Badalamen, who's still a secretary and still working at employee site 1. Okay, so that was it. That's all I needed to show for that one. So we can go back to the main menu and we'll add an employee. So if we look at what employees we have, we'll see that 28 is the next employee to be entered. So we'll enter employee 28. We'll enter some person and we'll give them a position of, let's say, we'll put sales, and we'll put them in working at site number 102. So we'll add this employee. So the employee was added, and then we'll go ahead and refresh the database. So their employee number should be 28. So there it is, employee number 28. So the answer is sales and working at employee site number 1.02. So we'll go back to the main menu, and basically that's all the links working and editing the data and adding data. So I'll go ahead and exit here, and I think there's a few questions left. So what was the hardest? Definitely the hardest part was the edit form. The edit form, actually getting it to edit, not for reasons that were actually difficult. When I was actually writing the code, I missed a line and it was actually spitting out errors. And I literally had to go back to the code line by line by line by line. And here, let me show you what was actually the problem with that. And the problem with that was this line right here. So basically everything was correct, but I was missing this line right here. So when it was sending this command, the where EMP ID was actually blank and it wasn't sending anything, so it didn't know where to actually update it. So I had I had the string edit ID, so I mean I had that, but I wasn't corresponding it to what was in the command, and so it didn't know where to actually look. So once I added that, everything started working fine and it was all good. What you enjoyed? I mean, this was a fun project overall. I mean, I pretty much enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed doing it, all of it. I mean, there's nothing I really didn't enjoy. Like, even though this form itself, the edit form or the edit employee form, gave me some trouble. I mean, it's fun having to kind of, troubleshoot and go back and look and see what the problem was. Because I mean, once you find it, it's extremely fulfilling. What would you do different? Um, I mean, I don't know what I would do different. I think I'd probably do the same, to be honest. Like, it wasn't too crazy, but at the same time, it wasn't too easy. It was a good medium difficulty, I guess, but I really don't think I'd do anything different. I don't know. I think I was pretty happy with the way I handled the problems that I came across, and that was about it. I think those were all the questions. So thank you for a fun project and have a good rest of the school year, I guess.